Well, guys, that's a wrap. So, after almost what feels like an eternity since Tim Cook took over Apple from Steve Jobs when Steve Jobs sadly passed away, we have come to our final public seeing of Tim Cook as CEO when he stepped out onto the stage for his final WWDC as CEO. Now, if you guys have been living under a rock or you don't know what I'm talking about, come September 1st, Tim Cook will officially be out as Apple's CEO. He is stepping down, resigning. He will be a part of the board, so he will still continue in his position at Apple, but just in a lower capacity. And taking his place will be the new upcoming John Ternus. I hope I'm saying that right. But today's video is really to talk about Tim Cook's legacy as Apple's CEO. It's also to talk about the impact that he had on the company, and I'm gonna do it in a different way, where everybody on the internet, and no disrespect to anybody making videos about Tim Cook's tenure at Apple, I am gonna focus on my experience watching him as CEO as a kid going out of middle school into high school, and then from high school to college, and then finishing college into where we are now. Tim Cook's tenure has shaped my entire life, from the phases of Apple during my time as a child, to a teenager, to a young adult, and now to being a full adult. So I'm going to talk about Tim Cook's tenure from that perspective, and I want to give you guys the ultimate, in my opinion, the ultimate send-off that I can give with a personal message at the end about Tim Cook. So on August 24th, 2011, it was announced that Tim Cook would become the new CEO of Apple after being handpicked by Steve Jobs, and just sadly, weeks later, Steve passed away, or days later. Again, I will make sure to get all this information corrected as you are seeing it. But with that being said, it was a very rough time for Apple and a rough time for the fans, because we all knew of Steve Jobs' diagnosis with cancer, and at this time, I was just an 11-year-old kid in middle school who hadn't even owned an iPhone, but knew all about the products of Apple, and hearing the news of Steve Jobs' death definitely impacted the world in a big way. So imagine the amount of pressure that this man faced for essentially what was going to be a very rough period of time, not only as a new CEO, but also as someone trying to be the next big thing for Apple. Because that was the first thing that plagued this man's tenure, was the constant comparisons to Steve Jobs. And that was the thing that I remember hearing the most from my uncle and my family and people that were huge Apple fans. This man was compared to Steve Jobs, but not compared in a way where it was favorable or could be favorable, but instead he was compared as if he had to live up to Steve's expectations, or also having to live up to whatever the world saw that he could be. And every time he stepped out on stage, from the iPhone 5 to the 5S, and I remember getting the iPhone 5 as my first ever iPhone, everybody just felt that he was nothing like Steve Jobs. He didn't have the energy, he didn't have the charisma, he didn't have all of these things that everybody wanted. And looking back at it, as a kid, yeah, I used to say he's no Steve Jobs, I miss the old Apple. But then all of that changed, because then in 2015 came the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus. And that was the event that Tim Cook finally felt like his own. You could see a shift in his dynamic. You can tell that the products that he was releasing on that stage were not only housed by himself and everybody on board, but he knew there was something that was going to be significant. And he came out on that stage and he sold it like he knew everything. And from 2015 onward has been sometimes some downs, but majorly up, because Tim's focus on Apple was services and products, while also generating new revenue streams, and more importantly, embracing a lot of the streaming services in terms of Apple Music, Apple TV, as well as iCloud, expanding on those features and really getting Apple positioned to generate revenue in newer areas that I don't even think Steve Jobs could have done. Now, I'm not underestimating the power and the abilities of Steve Jobs, but when you look at this man, Tim Cook came from a money background, a strategic point of view. He focused heavily on the numbers, and a lot of people didn't like that. But looking at Apple today as a $4 trillion company, the fact that this man took it to that level shows you exactly that he knew where to look, how to do it. Now, there were a lot of negatives during this run, specifically on the product side. A lot of times people felt like Apple had lost its magic, or some people had felt that there were iPhones that felt that shouldn't have been released, or there were times that things shouldn't have been made. But for every negative we had, we also had insane amounts of positives. During his tenure, the AirPods came out, the Apple Watch came out. There were expansions to the iPhone lineup, creating newer devices, adding a plus size to the lineup. Plus, we also had multiple different design changes over the years that kept everything feeling somewhat refreshed. And for me, the peak of the iPhone was, at least for me, when I was in high school, the iPhone 6S and iPhone 7 was peak. Then the iPhone 10 came out, then the 10S, 10S Max, the 11, 12, and onward and so forth. And then really what came out of it was the iPhone 15 embracing USB-C and going down that road. And since then, you know, the iPhones are starting to finally feel different, and that could be in hand because of John Ternus and his impact that he's had as the senior vice president of the hardware team. But with that being said, though, Tim Cook did bring a lot of other products to the market, like expanding the HomeKit with the HomePod lineup, different iPad minis, getting the budget iPad, embracing different things. And listen, we could put this all on a team, and I don't want to take anything away from those teams, but this man knew what he was doing when he said that he needed to expand it for all consumers. He hit every niche market, and even if they were losing money, they still found ways to maneuver to come back. The HomePod to the HomePod Mini, the iPad to the iPad Mini, the iPhone to the, well, they still haven't figured that one out, but the MacBook to the MacBook Air, and now the cheapest MacBook Neo. So it is shown that Tim Cook can generate money and can generate it through different products and services. And he did a phenomenal job at riding that momentum. But again, like I said before, there were negatives during this tenure. Like when I said the product started to feel stale in certain areas, the innovation started to feel a little cheap. Apple kind of falling into their greediness by focusing on the sales and marketing and focusing only on the revenue sources and not the actual product. There were moments that we had, and there were even a lot of controversies during his tenure. But despite all of it, Tim weathered the storm and made Apple his own. He expanded the Apple Park. He made people want to go to Cupertino to see this amazing place that Steve had visioned, and he saw it through. He also released the Vision OS with Apple Vision Pro, a product that everybody says is niche, but I do think is starting to build steam for future products. So this man did house and release during his tenure a lot of revolutionary products that have changed the landscape into today. Looking at high school to now, we no longer even use wired headphones. A majority of Americans, or wherever you are in the world, a majority of people are using wireless. Now, of course, we all know wired is the better way for sound, but for convenience and for the purposes of ecosystem, it just made sense. And seeing how all this shaped under Tim Cook's vision was something that really felt special. So, to end off this video, I know everybody's going to have their opinion on Tim Cook, and I know everybody's going to start talking about John Ternus, and they're going to do exactly the same thing that they did to this man when he came in. Compare him and start talking about what can he do versus what can't he do. And my advice would be very simple. Just do you. Just like Steve Jobs told Tim Cook is probably telling John Ternus, this is your ship now, make it the way you want it. We'll talk about John Turnus as a CEO, and we'll talk about how he presents himself in the September event. We'll get to all that later on. But all I can say is that, and I doubt that this is ever going to see the eyes of Tim Cook. I doubt this will ever even be seen by somebody big within Apple. But if Tim Cook somehow magically stumbled upon this video, I would like to just say this. Your tenure at Apple helped to shape not only the modern way that we live today, but it helped to shape my life in a big way. From the way that we use the products, to the way that everything works, and to the way that Apple is today. There may have been decisions and things that I didn't agree with and a majority of people didn't agree with, but the one thing that you never did was fold. You weathered the storm, you did what you had to do, and you got Apple to where it is today. And while you do take your last bow, and while you do say goodbye, I think we should all be saying thank you. You came in at a very difficult time. You came in at a time when Apple needed a leader. You were ridiculed for 2 some-odd years in the beginning, but you came back, you weathered the storm, and you made Apple your vision. You did it exactly the way that you wanted it to be done, and you did it exactly how it needed to be. So all I can say is, Tim, good evening, and thank you. Thank you for everything you've done. Wish you nothing but the best in your retirement. You're going to go off into the sunset in the most expensive house of the unemployment line because you are retired and you are worth every penny that you have. So, thank you, and I look forward to what happens now with Apple with John Turnus.